Today, the great KiwiSaver robbery. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, what's my latest post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian and New Zealand flavour. And today I'm joined again by property expert Joe Wilkes. Hi Joe.
Hi Martin.
How are you going?
Yeah, very good. Got a little bit of reaction to those posts that we did the other day. I had a couple of people get in touch with me offering assistance, which is always good to hear. So Nigel, who's one of our commentators, got in touch. Look forward to speaking to him in the next few days and get a little bit more information from around the country and try and shed some light on the things that they don't want us to hear.
Yeah, well, it's great that the community is actually responding and collaborating, and it's helping us to become ever more powerful in terms of the insights that we produce. So, shout out to all of those followers who actually take time to comment. Although one and two didn't like the Irish bit, Joe.
I know. To be fair, I looked at it afterwards. I didn't like it either. I should just stick to doing the home county's POM accent, and hopefully that will suffice.
Yeah, I've learned over the years never to try accents because I know that I can't do them.
Well, anyway, I will give up on that for our watchers. I'll stop doing that.
Okay. Now the KiwiSaver, I don't really know much about KiwiSaver. It's not a sort of a thing that's here in Australia. So let's start from the basics first. What is KiwiSaver?
Well, we were a little bit late to the party on putting together a government-backed superannuation scheme. Australia, in fact, I was in Australia in 2000, and you guys were sort of up and running on your superannuation schemes then. I guess that the provision was that we will provide something that's employee contributions, government contributions, and allow people to save and work. And this came in really sort of after the financial crisis. 2009 was the first year where people started saving into KiwiSaver, and you get a range of options from saving. I think it's 3% of your income or gross income up to around 8%, which then is backed by the government, who offer a further contribution if you go over a minimum savings threshold in a tax year. And I think it's been a wonderful thing for developing a savings habit in a country where you've got to remember the last 4 years now, households have run negative savings. So what they're saving themselves hasn't actually been positive, but the KiwiSaver has allowed people to build up a fund for retirement, and that's what the original intention of the fund was. And you can see I've provided some graphs with you today, Martin. I thought we'd just talk through the graphs and sort of run through what's happening. So the first one was, I guess, a graph that looks at the KiwiSaver accounts that get closed every year. Now, the KiwiSaver balance is getting up there now. The banks run various KiwiSaver accounts for their customers, and there are also a number of private providers. Simplicity do a KiwiSaver, which is a not-for-profit KiwiSaver, I think quite popular. But you can see year on year, as this KiwiSaver builds up, there are withdrawals that are being made. Now, some of those withdrawals are being made for retirement, which you'd expect. But you can see there's also lots of other reasons that people are withdrawing funds. And each year, I guess because the pool of funds is going up, more people are saving more each year. But also what we're seeing is the withdrawal levels are going up. And they're going up for all manner of reasons. If people pass away, it's natural that the KiwiSaver accounts gets closed by the estate. Serious illness is another reason that you can close your KiwiSaver. Permanent immigration, so if you're leaving the country not to return, you can close your KiwiSaver. And there have been a few of those, but it's stayed fairly steady. I don't think we've seen mass withdrawal of KiwiSaver funds for that means over the last few years. And then obviously the retirement side, and you can see that the number of KiwiSaver accounts that have closed over the course of 2018. I don't have 2000 or details yet to the June 2019 year. Stats New Zealand will probably publish those when they get around to it. But you can see that there were over 100 or nearly 180,000 KiwiSaver accounts closed last year. So this is where people are very quickly into retirement because that's the majority of what's causing the closed accounts. They're very quickly stripping the KiwiSaver accounts, and that's, I don't know. I mean, it's a sign, I think, of sort of financial tension within the market.
So, Joe, I had one quick question on that. When you go into retirement and you've got a KiwiSaver account and the government sort of helps in the accumulation phase, do they provide any further help in the subsequent phase, or is it essentially then you're on your own with regard to the KiwiSaver? In other words, is there no incentive once you move into retirement to keep the KiwiSaver account open?
Yeah, there's no longer contributions made. So when the contributions come from the government when you're working and building it up. I mean, we do have a state pension as well, and that's common still around the Western world, albeit it's gradually being phased out. And in other countries, retirement ages have gone up. In New Zealand, staunch support for retirement age to stay at 65, and anyone who's suggested it in policy has been thrown down very, very quickly, because we've still got, I guess, that weight of voting bloc between 55 and upwards.
Right, but so the point there is no real incentive to keep your money in the KiwiSaver once you get to the point of moving out from the working population into the retirement population, right? Which is one of the reasons why we're seeing the numbers rising of those closing.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that well, part of it is that people will then be wanting access to the funds to either manage the funds themselves, or they don't want to keep them with the fund providers who they've had them with previously. So I thought that was quite interesting as one start, but also just the number of withdrawals that have been gradually on the rise over the last few years.
Okay, and I had just one other question. Sorry if this is not important, but I just want, what are the fees? I mean, are there, because it's a managed scheme, right? So are there fees involved in people who have money in KiwiSavers?
It very much depends on whether you're using certain providers. I mean, the government-backed providers, there will be fees, but are they openly disclosed? But generally, most of the pension firms will be charging fees on these funds.
Right. Okay. So that's one of the interesting things, of course, because any fees taken out of an accumulation fund have a huge impact on the overall return from the fund. And certainly, I don't know whether it's the same over there, but in Australia, those fees are hardly ever disclosed and not fully disclosed. And therefore, what you end up with is often less than you might think it would be.
Yeah, well, you only have to look at the UK and Mr. Woodford's fund at the moment to realise that there's been a huge amount of I suppose, cloak and dagger with respect to the fees being charged. And this is a fund that at the moment you can't withdraw anything from, and yet fees are still being applied to people and their balances. So, yeah, I can understand why people want to take control if they are being charged fees and they're not getting the government benefit from it.
Sure. Okay.
Now, going back to, I guess, the next thing, this fund was originally meant to be for retirement, and the whole purpose was that, okay, you weren't meant to be able to get your hands on it. It was supposed to build up, and from when you started your working career, whenever that was, after university or after you'd done your overseas excursion, you were meant to be contributing to this fund as a pool to get up into 65 and your dotage. That's not what's happening, though. And the reality of what's happening is that we're getting a great big robbery by first-time buyers of their KiwiSaver funds to try and support the deposit aspirations that they need to go and buy property. Second graph that I'd like just to highlight on the screen, you can see since 2009, two things that they show. One is the withdrawal levels for first-time buyer purchases. And this takes a massive spike from 2015 onwards, where you're getting sort of below 15,000 withdrawals per annum. This is the number of accounts that are being raided and robbed for house deposits. And very quickly it spikes up to close to 35,000. So 2015 to 2018, really, really sharp rise in the amount of money that people are just stripping out of the retirement funds. Many of them, if they've built up a fund from when this scheme started in 2009, that's the probably $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 that they might have saved by that point in time. Times that by 2 as part of a couple to purchase a house, and you've nearly got your house deposit. What you don't have is anything now for the rainy day of retirement, other than the house, which you've got to hope keeps going up, because if it doesn't, everything's a bit of a mess. So I was quite surprised to see how much and how many withdrawals. And 35,000 withdrawals last year almost matches the 27,000 new loans recorded by the RBNZ for house purchases. So again, I've got some issues with that data, but I think what you'll see is that a lot of these 35,000, they're being doubled up. So it's probably really 18,000 households, there or thereabouts, 17,500 households, plus the mortgage loan from the bank, and that's it. Your savings are gone, but you've got your house deposit.
So the doubling up is because you've got husband and wife, say, both with a Kiwi account, right? And they both pull their money out, pull that money to make a deposit to buy a house.
Absolutely, but this is also happening with people who are in their 40s and 50s who've owned houses before. Now they're not able to get the new home grants because they've owned properties in the past. But what they too are being allowed to do is to strip the KiwiSaver and rob it to provide more equity, either to borrow more money for a bigger house or to help them get a better house with lower debt levels. So it's quite interesting how this scheme that was deemed to be sacrosanct for retirement is now absolutely fair game on the table to keep the debt bubble going and to keep property prices inflated. The other thing that I was quite interested by that chart was they also have a financial hardship withdrawal. So you can apply to your KiwiSaver to get a withdrawal for financial hardship. And that too has been on the rise. So back in the early years, going up to 2014, 15, that level hovered below 10,000, really between the 5, 6, 7, 8,000 in terms of numbers of withdrawals. That has spiked up over 17, 18, and has now gone over 15,000, approaching 17,000 withdrawals for hardship. So this could be where someone's taken on a car loan that, okay, the risk is the car's about to go, I need to get some money to pay for the car loan so that I can keep going to work. Or it could be, I've just lost a job, I need to raid my KiwiSaver. And I don't have any problems with this as reasons for getting by. But the fact that too is on the rise is again a sign of debt stress, probably more in things like the rented sector than it is in the ownership sector. But it just goes to show how little Kiwis have as a rainy day buffer. Now, there was some work done by ANZ and also by Westpac a year ago. And these may shock you, these numbers, but Westpac, in an analysis of Kiwi households, said that 34% last year have less than $1,000 in savings in the bank. 60% have less than $5,000 in savings. So we have no buffer, which is why these KiwiSavers are being robbed. Because the minute people have an issue, there is no cushion to go and survive. They have to go and raid the KiwiSavers. Doesn't bode well for financial stability, but it does make sense now why the government last week or 2 weeks ago announced that we're going to have this guarantee for deposits up to 30 to 50,000, which will cover 90% of the population. Well, actually, it may be 60% of the population. You only need it up to 5,000. So we have got a real challenge there, and the whole stability of everything is all relying on this credit growth for housing, stripping KiwiSavers to fund the deposit to keep the bubble going.
Just on that, you might be interested in Australia, and the RBA recently came out and said I think around 30% of households essentially have less than 1 month's access to free funds. So in other words, if they had a crisis, within a month, they would have a difficulty. So we have a similar thing here with a proportion of the population with absolutely no assets behind them for a rainy day.
Yeah. And these are the things that we've got to work on, and one of the things that it is the high cost of housing. The landlords are in so much debt that the rents are so high. Yes, we have got an increase in the population, but if you look at the numbers of people this is the whole thing about the housing shortage myth. Back in 1998, if you compare the number of people living so the number of houses per 1,000 people, it was hovering around the 380 mark. Go to today, the number of houses per 300 people is actually still hovering around the 380, 390 mark. So we don't have, and these are numbers from Stats New Zealand, we don't have a massive difference in the supply of houses per head of population. And yet we're all being led to believe that, there's a housing shortage, there's a housing crisis. And landlords, many of them, the mums and dads, have just been suckered into, okay, well, we better borrow some money to get into this. Other interesting charts, which I'll provide up on the screen, payments to scheme providers by category. You look at the employee deductions, employee contributions. Employee deductions, what's coming out of people's savings. The employer contributions, voluntary contributions make up a tiny amount of what people are saving into their KiwiSavers. So it's grown a touch, but when you look at the thin yellow sliver on the graph that we'll provide, you can see 2018, it's just a minuscule proportion of what annually is being saved. And annually last year, New Zealand has saved just over 6 billion in their KiwiSaver accounts. They've borrowed over, I think it was 8.9 billion on credit cards. So there's a bit of a mismatch there in terms of the numbers. The other thing is that you're starting to see an increase in the automatic enrolment, so people are automatically being enrolled in these schemes. And again, that's, I think, sensible. I think people should be made to do this if they can't have the discipline to save themselves. The numbers, relatively flat though in terms of the new entrance to that.
It's interesting, of course, because with interest rates so low, there is perhaps a greater disincentive than ever for people to save. And my observation is that younger people particularly don't seem to think that saving is that important. I mean, you might try and save for a small deposit or what have you, but in many cases, in my surveys in Australia, I'm getting the sense of, well, I'm in so much in debt now from student days, etc. I'm always going to be in debt. What's the point of saving? So there is a fundamental question mark about that. And interestingly, of course, if you talk to the Treasury or if you talk to the Reserve Bank, they actually recognise that if you have too many people saving, that's actually negative for economic activity.
Yeah.
and for economic growth. So there's something really wacky here about the fact that the whole way that society has been structured and the financial system has been structured, it actually disincentivizes people to save, which for me, as somebody who's always been drilled into me when I was young, my dad was a bank manager, right? So he always said, make sure that you save for a rainy day because it's really, really important, right? So I've always done that. And I find it really hard to understand a philosophy that says, no point in saving. I'm just going to borrow more and more.
Yeah, well, I probably came from a similar upbringing, and it is an interesting, dichotomy to see how the behaviours are. And I think that there are a lot of young people who've just given up. It's a case of, well, I'm never going to get to this point, and therefore I'm never going to own a house, and therefore it's just a case of, well, I may as well just live for the today rather than think about where I want to be in 2 or 3 years' time. It's worrying that so quickly after the attempt to try and save, and these KiwiSavers, that people are they're looking at their pots, and some of them are actually quite pleased when these things go up and see the growth in them. But so quickly they're being encouraged to just to raid them again for that swap of the savings for the debt on the loan. I can't see a way out of it though for New Zealand at this moment in time, because the savings rates are so poor.
Yep.
That it's the mainstream media will have to keep perpetuating this asset price bubble that we have in housing. It's the only thing that's sustaining everything.
Well, that's of course the point, isn't it? That essentially the economy needs to grow. they say the only way it can grow is to actually encourage more people to borrow bigger and to stoke the housing market. That's why, of course, everyone's now focusing on trying to re-stimulate the housing sector and provide all these incentives to get people back in. But as you know and I know, the question of sustainability is a really important one.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens. I mean, you can see financial hardships going up. You can see the amount of money that is being withdrawn for the property market. That's all they want. And actually, when you look at the levels of balances that people have got to, there aren't many very big KiwiSaver balances. So even if you are hitting retirement and you've got a reasonable amount, the levels of savings and just the amount that people are saving from low incomes is not going to be enough to sustain people.
Yeah, well, an interesting challenge perhaps for some of those New Zealand viewers. If you have a KiwiSaver account, what do you think about it? Have you taken money out to buy a house, or have you not? Or be interested to perhaps get some reactions on the.
I'd like to see some comments on what people think about it. I mean, we've just thrown the numbers out there today. We've talked about the lack of savings, but I'd be really interested to see whether people genuinely see this as a route to home ownership, or is it an investment vehicle for retirement? And if you have withdrawn money, how much were you allowed to draw? Were you allowed to strip the account bare? These things would be quite interesting to hear from our viewers.
Okay. Joe, well, I appreciate that. Really interesting conversation today. Thank you so much.
Good to see you, Martin.
So there you have it. An interesting take from Joe. And I wonder what you think about savings schemes and whether they should be encouraged or whether it's all a bit pointless. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.